Hey everyone, we are live with the 11th edition of the Airbyte Community Call. I'm super excited to see everyone out here. We have a few people who have joined us in the audience. I'm going to let some people trickle in as I introduce my guest here. I guess to give a bit of background on what we've been doing before we jump into Thomas's presentation, I'd invite everyone to basically check out the videos from our previous launch week. If you didn't know, we actually just ran a Airbyte launch week where we kind of revealed a bunch of different things. We revealed the roadmap of what we're working on. We revealed the new CLI that we're working on, and we announced our conference that we're going to be hosting later this year. If you want to submit a CFP for that conference, it is totally open to everyone. So please go ahead and share your thoughts about data integration, analysis, data engineering, really anything in the space with us. We'd love to hear you speak there. So yeah, if you haven't seen any of the videos from the conference, go ahead and check, rather from the launch week, go ahead and check that out. Now I would love to announce who is going to be speaking today. For some background, Faros AI is a company that adopted Airbyte, I think, fairly early on. One of the kind of the biggest things that they did for us was they contributed the JavaScript Airbyte connector development kit, and they did this pretty early on, and they've been working on creating custom JavaScript connectors, which is fairly unique, and it's something that the Airbyte protocol definitely supports and wants to bring in. Thomas Gerber here is the engineering is basically one of the engineering leads at Faros. Previously, Thomas was basically directed the Salesforce Einstein project, and he's been the founder of technology companies and has held lots of lots of leadership roles and has been a lot around the data engineering industry. So really excited to have him here and to have him talk about how he integrated Airbyte into Faros Community Edition. So without further ado, thank you so much for being on the community call, Thomas.
It is my pleasure, Abby, and thank you everyone for joining. Yeah, so today I was hoping to spend a few minutes with you describing what Faros does, why that means that Faros needs ELT capabilities, and then why we chose Airbyte to fulfill those capabilities, and then how we integrate concretely Airbyte into Faros CE. So without further ado, let's get into it. What is Faros? Faros is the connected engineering operations platform. What it means concretely is that we aim to provide an API, BI, and automation layer for engineering operations data. What is engineering operations data? It's like things like pull requests, incidents, builds, deployments, everything that you do on a daily basis when you are a software engineer to get around your code. So today, when you build an application, for those who are software engineers, you instrument that application with Datadog and New Relic and Sumo, and that's great and it's important. We hope that engineering organization will also instrument their own organization and how their own operations work with Faros, so that they can answer questions around bottleneck in CI/CD pipelines, issue in onboarding processes, how they track against their goals. And for that, they'll need data that is fresh, connected, queryable, and in one place. And that's what I'm going to get into now. So I'm going to show you briefly we have a SaaS offering. We also have a community edition that you can run yourself. And I'm going to show you the basic capabilities in order to demonstrate why we need ELT in the first place. Then we're going to talk about why we chose Airbyte and how we integrated into it. Before the call started, I simply started Faros Community Edition. This is our documentation site. I simply cloned our repo and just launched. So 3 commands. So once you've launched Faros Community Edition, Airbyte is bundled inside Faros Community Edition. And so you can now access Airbyte. And right off the bat, so localhost 8000, it's run on my machine. And right off the bat, you see that you have a few things in here. Sources, destinations, connections. We'll get back to that when we talk about the integration. But what I'm going to do now, as part of the quick start, I'm simply connect my GitHub repo in Airbyte to send data into Faros. So I'm going to go to sources. You're probably familiar with the screen. I'm going to go into settings. I'm going to specify the connector, the repository that I want synchronized. And I'm going to put my GitHub token in it. Okay. And we're done. I save. It's gonna run a few checks, which is great, by the way. And now I'm going to launch this preset connection, and it's going to start doing its thing. So while it does its thing, it's going to take a minute. I just want to point you to a few things. The destination that's preset in Airbyte is a Faros destination. We're going to come back to it when we discuss integrations. But one of the things that the destination knows how to do is where to send the data that it extracts from GitHub. And in this case, I'm sending the data to a GraphQL endpoint powered by Hasura, which runs on my local machine as well. A couple of other things that I want to point you to while it's syncs is that, a few preset sources are actually, and the destination are actually custom, right? They're not part of the official Airbyte catalog. It's our own. And so, yeah, we're going to get to how we made that possible. So it's still running, almost there. So the data that's being extracted by Airbyte, we use Metabase to look at it for our BI. And so I have some default dashboards that will soon populate in a few moments. And that will give us some things like PR cycle time for our repo, reuse distribution, PR merge, and so forth. Yeah, so I think it's done now. So I'm just going to refresh this page. And boom, I have data that pertain to my open source repo. Reviews distributions, how many PR were merged in the past 30 days, how many issues, PR cycle time. And I want to point you already to a few interesting things. Like if you take a look at PR cycle time, this is something, by the way, if you look at our repo, you see I have a shield here, PR cycle time. This is powered by Faros Community Edition. And it's powered by Faros because simply GitHub does not give you that statistic. And so if you wanted to compute that statistic, you would need to do something similar to what we just did, meaning like extracting data from GitHub so that you can compute that metric, aggregate those numbers, right? That's slowly touching on why we need an ELT capability. But before I go there further, I'm just going to show you a couple of other things that you can do with Faros CE very briefly. Here I have a Hasura, my Hasura endpoint. I can send GraphQL requests. In this case, I'm going to ask like for all the pull requests, who were the users that did the reviews? Okay, now this is looking at the data that I just ingested. It's pretty nice. And so because now I have a BI and an API layer, I also have an automation layer. We took a look at Airbyte, Metabase, GraphQL. You can also build automations now because you have this GraphQL API. I'm just going to copy this thing here in our quick start. I'm going to paste it here. The only thing I did before this session, I just entered my Slack secret. So here I have a GraphQL endpoint that's going to do a request, and I'm going to send a message in Slack. I'm just going to say, so that we can identify it, Airbyte Community Call demo. Okay, and I'm going to execute it. And now if I look at our Slack channel, this is our Faros community Slack. You see that the message was just sent. That's because we have an API layer, and we can combine that with great tool like NA8 to automate things around your engineering operations. So let's go back and close the loop on why ELT is needed. So I showed you something pretty straightforward, PR cycle time, right? That already hints at why we need an ELT layer. But let me maybe give you an even more potent reason. I'm going to feed a few fake data into the platform, like incidents and deployments and builds. Some of you here may be familiar with DORA metrics. DORA metrics, DORA stands for DevOps Research and Assessment, I think. It's a group at Google that looks at what engineering organizations should track in order to correctly assess the health of the organization. And I have a dashboard that tracks those metrics here. One of the key metric that they figured out engineering leaders should track is lead time. Lead time is the time it takes from the code you commit, how long it takes to get to production. And this is actually not trivial because you need to essentially track commits across different systems. Your version control system like GitHub, but then also your CI/CD system like Circle CI, Travis CI, and then possibly maybe also even your artifact registry. Like you need to understand what commit made it to what artifact. This is hard, and you need to compute things like, hey, this commit made it at this time in dev, in QA, in staging, and all those things. You need data from a lot of different systems, and you need to make sure that this data connects properly so that you can actually trace that commit throughout. right? This is just an example, but it is to show that you actually need to store the data from all those different systems in a centralized place in order to compute those complex metrics. So back to my slide deck briefly. I hope you've seen like our architecture, right? Airbyte, Hasura, Metabase, DBT if you want to do transforms around our centralized schema, canonical schema. And I hope that through the few examples of metrics that I showed, I hope I showed why Faros requires ELT. But we are not in the ELT business. Faros is not in the ELT business. What we want to focus on is our canonical schema that describes the engineering operations world and its application. But data movement is hard, right? And so in order for us to focus on our core value, we decided to not build an ELT layer ourselves. We decided to use an ELT platform. Again, if we don't store the data, there is very little we can do, especially on the BI layer. So now that I think, established that we needed an ELT platform for our use case, the question is, why Airbyte? Why am I here talking to you today? And I think it boils down to three main arguments: the vibrant community, the Airbyte specification, and the catalog that is already here. Let me go into detail for each. What you see on the left are stats that are actually live here. We have a running production instance of Faros Community Edition that tracks a few interesting GitHub repositories. And this is the stats for the last 30 days, live stats for the main Airbyte repo. You can see that you have 84 unique contributors, 302 PR merged, a cycle time of 5 days. Like, this is the definition of a vibrant community. And for us, using a platform that has a vibrant community is very important. It's very important because we know that, like, if you look at the systems that a given engineering organization uses, it's almost like a fingerprint for that organization. Like, everyone is doing things differently, and so we know that if we want to be successful with data ingestion, given that there is so many different last mile problems, we need to essentially rely on something that's much bigger than ourselves, something that has a very vibrant community that everyone can interact with, contribute back to. So for us, we think it's the only way to be successful, have something with a vibrant community, and Airbyte has one of the most vibrant community out there. So that's argument number one. Argument number two, and by the way, if you're interested, you can go to the documentation and we have live example. You can take a look. That's the page I was showing. Argument number two is the spec. We knew going in there that not just us, but probably our users as well, at some point, they may need to write their own connectors or destinations. And the Airbyte specification gave us a lot of confidence that they will be able to do that, right? Because it defines pretty well what a sync is, the different type of things. Like in retrospect, it seems obvious, like the different sync modes, right? From full refresh, incremental, dedupe T3, all those things. But I'm quite sure it was not trivial to come up with those. The fact that this spec is that clean give us a lot of confidence that both us and our users will be able to do great things with our platform through Airbyte. And finally, the third argument for why Airbyte is a rich catalog that it already has. So GitHub, GitLab, Jira were already there, something we can contribute to and leverage. It's a nice way to not start from scratch and just already start leveraging the community and contributing back from day one. I hope that this gives you a good overview as to why we decided to go with Airbyte very early on. And I think those arguments were true then and are still true today. So now that we've discussed why Airbyte, let's go into a bit more detail on how we integrate it. And the integration essentially is three big things. The integration of Airbyte into Faros. Number one, the Faros destination, right? It's the main way that data gets into Faros, the destination. So we're going to spend a few minutes on this. Then the deployment. How do we bundle Airbyte with Faros Community Edition and the challenges we had there? And finally, how we did this preset config in Airbyte so that the first time a user logs in, he already has the sources configured, the connections and destination and so forth. Out of the slides again, and let's go take a look at the destination. So our Faros destination is also open source in a different repo. We discussed earlier on that one of the things that the Faros destination needs to do is where to send the data. right? And we saw in the config of the Faros destination that you essentially specify a Hasura GraphQL endpoint. Now, the other thing that the destination needs to do is it needs to be able to take a stream. Say, let's take the pull request stream from the GitHub source. It needs to take the data that comes from that stream and write it against our canonical model for what a pull request is. So there is a small conversion to be made. And for that, we have what's called converter in our code. So if I take a look here, I have for each stream, I have a converter. Again, all of this is open, is public, so you can come back to this later if you're interested. But essentially, you can see that I take the data from the stream and I write against my canonical schema. And now those who have written destinations before, you may ask, hey, like, how do you know which converter to call? And this is the first great feature that we leverage from Airbyte. It's the table prefix. For those who are familiar, in every connection, you can specify a table prefix. And so we use this table prefix to let the users of Faros tell us two things. One, what source is the data coming from? Not the source type, but just the name of a source. This is useful because we store that bit that I'm highlighting here on the database side, so that when you do reset data, it will delete the data that that were created by this connection. The second piece of information that we ask our user to pass is, hey, what converter to call? So that's the second piece of the table prefix here. They tell us exactly which, to the Faros destination, which converter should be invoked for the streams. And so, yeah, table prefix, great. It allowed us to keep the Faros destination pretty compact and modularized, especially since we can pre-configure all of this. That was very worth it. So that's for the destination. The second piece I mentioned in terms of integration is how do we bundle Airbyte with Faros CE? So for local deployment, it's pretty straightforward. We use Docker Compose, and it's a good thing that Airbyte already has like some version of that in its repo. So we just copied it over and just extended that to deploy all the Airbyte services when you do Docker Compose up. When you start the product, the only thing the start does is actually Docker Compose up. So that was pretty straightforward, and that's what I've been using for this demo on my local machine. When you want to deploy on the cloud, though, which is eventually where you want to get to, because if you want to really leverage Faros, you need to put it somewhere that is not just your machine. That was harder. Because we had several services that we use, like Airbyte, Hasura, Metabase, and so forth. But also because Airbyte, I'm sure some of you know, is notoriously difficult to deploy on a cloud environment, like your AWS EKS or something similar. And this, we were very lucky to leverage other great member of this community. And want to give a shout out to Plural.sh. They made it super easy to deploy Faros, because essentially when you deploy in the cloud, you just do plural install Airbyte on your AWS EKS cluster. Same with Hasura, same with Metabase. So it's like almost like a one-click deployment. And then the only thing that you have left to do is just run a few init script to make those pieces talk to each other, right? So that's a 10-minute effort. And we didn't have to go into details of Terraform, Helm charts, or all that difficult stuff, which saved us quite a lot of time and effort. So Pro is now the way we recommend deploying Faros CE in production environment, and they did a great job at just making some things that's notoriously hard one-click effort. So that was for deployment. And finally, I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about how we preset those sources, destination, and connections. So first time you log in, you see those sources, you see this destination, you see those connections. How did we do that? It's another great feature of Airbyte. If you go to settings, configuration, you see you can export and import config, right? So essentially, that's how we did it. We had an engineer set that up correctly locally, all those connections and destinations and sources. And then he clicked export, and that created a zip of files, which are actually those files that you see here in our repo, Airbyte config. And then the only things that had to happen is he had to scrub them from tokens and things like this. and maybe parameterize a little bit them so that you can pass your own Hasura URL in the init script and all of those things, or your secret. And then he just had to create some scripts that invoke the import API so that this configuration is applied the first time you start Airbyte. So it was very easy, and it provides a lot of value because now customers, users, I would say, when they first access Airbyte, they already have everything set up. You've seen when we started the demo, I just gave my GitHub token and the repo, and that's it. And I had data. So that was a worth it integration. So back to the presentation then. I've discussed why Airbyte, I discussed the integration. A community only works if you can leverage it and give back to it. If everyone just takes, it doesn't work. And so for us, it was very important to find good ways to give back. And so we do that in several ways. Abby mentioned that we contributed the TypeScript or JavaScript connector development toolkit. When we started, there was only the Python one, and we're a TypeScript shop. So we decided, hey, it's worth it. Like, let's just create a TypeScript version of the CDK so that every TypeScript or JavaScript shop can use and contribute their own custom or new sources. So if you look at the documentation, the Airbyte documentation, yeah, this connected development kit, that's the one we contributed.
I have a quick question. So was the Faros, but the Faros destination connector, was that written in TypeScript?
Yep, it's written in TypeScript as well. So the Faros destination uses our own connected development, the connected development kit that we contributed.
Awesome. So additionally, like, why did was there a specific reason that you chose to use TypeScript, or was it just because like that was just something your organization was
it's something we're just using.
Yeah, cool.
We didn't want to start a new, and to be fair, like the Python CDK is already great. The spec is great. So it was not an enormous effort to create a TypeScript CDK. So we just decided to do it and maintain it.
Cool. All right. Thank you.
We also contributed new sources to the catalog: Harness, PagerDuty, Jenkins, VictorOps, and a few others. Like if you look in the connector list, if you look those up, yeah, those are the ones. Some of them we contributed. We give back, and it's important. It's important for ethical reasons, but also remember, this allows it helps our users as well, right? Because we know that if our users can themselves also leverage and give back to the community, it's going to help them, it's going to help the community. And as I mentioned earlier, especially with data and engineering systems, there are so many of them that you want a community that's as wide as possible so that users get to great results quickly. So that was about giving back. And finally, the last piece of my presentation, I just wanted to mention something about how great it is to compose software. You can see in our architecture, we compose Airbyte, we compose Metabase, we compose Hasura. Like if you think about what does Faros do, actually, it's a schema. It's a canonical schema, and how we convert those streams into, again, we convert them into our canonical models, right? That's, we're glad to be able to focus just on that and let Hasura, Metabase, and Airbyte do all the rest, all the heavy lifting that we don't want to do because it's not our core business. And so what I'm trying to say here is when you launch Faros Community Edition, you have access to the full power of Airbyte. Right? It's not embedded. It's like you have access to Airbyte. And so you can do all the great things that Airbyte allows you to do as part of the Faros deployment. So for example, if you want to create a custom source for your homegrown system, you can. And it has a little bit to do with Faros, but not that much. So for example, we have users that have, for compliance reasons, they keep a log of deployments somewhere, and they manage to create a custom connector in Airbyte to feed the data into Faros. Great. Another example of things that one can do today, just because of how awesome Airbyte is, because you have all those sources and destinations, nothing prevents you from writing a connection between the Faros database and Snowflake or Redshift for to do some more advanced analytics over there, right? And you can do that directly from the Airbyte UIs that we embed. And finally, because of how it was built, let's just say you have an Airbyte cloud account. Well, you can use Faros CE with it. It's possible to deploy Faros CE without Airbyte, and then you just, in your own Airbyte cloud instance, you just add the Faros destination connector, point to your Hasura endpoints that you deployed as part of Faros CE, and you're in business. So my point is, composing software like this really let users unleash the full power of the components, and in this case, Airbyte, and we're pretty stoked about it because every new thing that Airbyte does, we benefit from it, and our users benefit from it, and that's awesome. That's it, folk.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So I actually had a question for you about the integration. So as you were presenting, I saw the thing you mentioned about using the Airbyte table prefix to let Faros know what stream you're passing down. Can you revisit that and kind of like explain why you decided to choose this approach? Because I think this is a fairly unique approach, because I guess you could have integrated us directly with the API, but instead I think you're like federating all of these like sources through the Faros custom destination, right? So I was wondering, like, could you talk about why you chose this approach and kind of go into more of the details there?
I will try my best, in the sense that the decision was not made by me, so I'm hoping that I'm not gonna be too much off the mark here. But let me try. So the thing that makes Faros very valuable is to map things that come from various sources into a canonical representation. So for example, a pull request from GitLab at the end of the day needs to look very similar once in Faros to a pull request from GitHub. And so we cannot just take the representation of the source to do this. We need to, somewhere there needs to be some mapping, right? And we thought that conversion. And we thought that the destination was a great place to do that, so that we don't have to orchestrate anything else on the database side, and directly have it canonically written, as opposed to writing it in its raw form and then having some additional processing happening that writes it in the canonical form. We thought, hey, like, especially for the community edition, like, if we can just make it work without any orchestration, it's better. And so to do that, we realized that once we figure out how to tell the first destination what converter to use, we're done. And the table prefix feature was right there staring us in the face. And we thought, yeah, well, perfect. Let's use that and get super quick time to value for our users.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess so. We have another question from Clarence. They ask, if Faros is kind of like an all-in-one package and you don't need to deploy Airbyte separately, it deploys it with it, right?
Yep.
So I guess this is kind of a question that I guess I'm thinking of tangentially to that. So Faros has a lot of these like built-in dashboards for like community management, right? Where does that extend to instead of like for customizability, right? So let's just say you wanted to import your own like custom sources. Like let's just say you have like maybe marketing sources or some other sources that you want to use and start visualizing. Like would you have to go and like create a Faros like integration for that, or could you do that off the shelf?
So a couple of there are several layers to answer here. So first off, you can do in Metabase, it's extremely flexible. And so, for example, if I just want to show like the number of PRs per users, that's a few clicks. I can visualize, boom, I can save it in a dashboard. Our pre-canned dashboard is just like a good place to start. But ideally, what we want our users to do is to create metrics and charts as a regular part of the job to address a problem or see if there's one, or things of that nature. Now you can extend, we have documentation on it as well, you can extend the schema, right? So for example, if you now think that part of your operations involves some other things, like for example, maybe you want to say track not necessarily incident, but let's just say customer issues, right? That arrives to Zendesk. Today, it's not something that we model in our schema. It will be one day, but like you're not stuck, because you can extend the schema, in this case through Hasura. You can create a custom source. So what it means is you write the source first, and then you will also give the converters into the Faros destination so that you know how to map the Zendesk streams onto the canonical models that you have extended through Hasura. The way we thought about Faros is really focusing on extensibility
Mhm.
and customizability, because we know that, over time, we don't want to just be nice charts that you look once in a while. We want you to be able to explore your own operations data. Very similar to what I said earlier, like Datadog, it's not just a set of dashboards. On New Relic, it's not just a set of dashboards. You can actually look into the data. You can get to the bottom of things. It's very similar. It's not about your app, right? This time it's about your own engineering operations, but we want you to be able to do something very similar, and that's why extensibility and the ability to look into the data is so important. And that's also why the ELT layer is so fundamental to anything that we want to achieve in Faros, and why the choice of Airbyte was so critical for us to make.
Awesome. Yeah, and this is completely free to just take off the shelf, right?
Yep, it's free. You just go to our GitHub repo. By the way, if some of you have open source repos and you would like a PR cycle time shield, you can just go to documentation and request one. We're happy to host that small bits of data for you and give you the shield. It's pretty cool.
Awesome. So I guess we'll take one more question from Clarence, and then I think we'll wrap up for today. They ask, is there any plan to have the New Relic and Bugsnag integrations? And from what I heard about Thomas before, I think you could create those yourself. But I guess, Thomas, the question would be around whether you're going to natively support that.
Yeah, we will keep expanding what our canonical schema covers. First and foremost, the core right now is from tasks through pull requests, through incidents, through builds and deployments, right? Those kind of entities. And we'll keep expanding over time. We usually try to cover things that are not there by default in the tools that you use. So for example, we'll not try to replicate necessarily the great tracing capabilities of New Relic, right? That's probably lives in New Relic itself. That being said, there are a couple of things like today where you may want something is you may want to link incidents and bugs to tasks and PRs. This is what we're focusing on. We're making sure to build a schema that connects things together, and those connections actually happen when you ingest the data in any order. So I don't know when we'll get to what specifically was asked in the question, but we'll keep expanding the core schema, or maybe our users can help us expand that.
Cool. That makes a lot of sense. So I think it's going to wrap us up for today. Thank you so much, Thomas, for the awesome presentation, covering each section, talking about extensibility and the landscape of open source projects that you've integrated into Faros. I really appreciate you being here and showing this off. Additionally, to anyone that is watching still, this will be recorded. This will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, and very, very shortly. So again, thank you so much for everyone who joined today. I saw a decent amount of you there. And Thomas, thank you so much again for your presentation.
No, thank you to the community. We're super happy to be part of that community.
Yeah, you've definitely given a lot back. So I hope that people try out Faros AI. It's open source. You can just pull it down from GitHub. I hope people try it out and contribute to your community as well. So that would definitely be awesome. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And see you on the next community call.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.